At this time, we're back. We're talking to everybody's excited about this episode. We're back talking to Sarah Brock, who is someone I've known for a long time. I'm trying to remember how
Yeah.
long we might have known each other. For folks that don't know, I work at KIPP SoCal here in LA, recruit teachers, and Sarah used to work at KIPP in a different state entirely, but doing a lot of the same things. When did you start trying to recruit teachers and working in public education?
I started as a teacher and then I moved into recruiting in 2010. So I don't think we want to do the math on how long we've known each other. We'll leave that one be, but it's been a while. Yeah.
Yeah, so you're out of that world a little bit. How do you look back on that time period of your life?
Yeah. I mean, it was having been a teacher and then moving into kind of recruiting teachers and leaders. Anyone who's been in education, I think, would say this. It's just some of the most important work is, teaching and who's in front of our kiddos. And so I really, really enjoyed the opportunity to just get to meet incredible people and then get to see them, years and years of their career in teaching. It was just a really cool opportunity to be able to see kind of the legacy that folks were leaving, and you're looking at them in their classroom and you're just thinking, gosh, I interviewed you 3 years ago. I'm so glad to see you here. It's really cool to kind of get to see your work come to fruition in that way. It was a good time.
Well, we're still early stage on this podcast, but even the first few
Yeah.
episodes we dropped, I heard a little bit of feedback, and folks appreciated kind of hearing some behind the scenes from folks who work in the talent world. Some of these folks were candidates or people who applied to jobs recently, or just kind of curious people about how that industry works. I'm curious with you because, like I said, we had similar jobs, then you took a leap and did something kind of different and went on your own. What was your kind of motivation to do that, and how would you describe what you're doing now?
Yeah. So I now run my own business. I've been doing it for almost 5 years, and I do a lot of fractional work in HR and talent. So what that means is I'm oftentimes filling in somebody's on maternity leave, or there's a vacancy, or just a small organization and they can't afford to maybe hire a full-time director of HR or a full-time chief people officer. So they'll hire me as a fractional talent or HR leader. And so I do a lot of that. That's kind of the bulk of my work. I'll do some projects here and there, or kind of some advisory clients where we just check in periodically. But most of my work is in the fractional space, which I think is a growing area, and not just in talent, but in general. I think a lot of companies are just looking for different ways to staff, especially just kind of in the world that we're in. But I actually ended up here. I did talent for KIPP for a long time, and then I moved, worked for a nonprofit for a little bit. And then I was actually fired from that job. And I share that because I think there's this shame oftentimes around being fired. And so often, as somebody who has fired people, who has coached managers on how to fire people, and who has been fired myself, I think that oftentimes it's just like not the right fit, not the right job. And so left that job, and then pandemic hit and I just kind of fell into running my own thing. And about a year in, I was like, gosh, I really like this. And so that's kind of the work I do now. Full circle back to KIPP moment when I was managing talent. I had two direct reports who went on maternity leave at the same time. And I thought I was just going to completely burn out. And so I love the chance now to kind of fill in when there's a gap so that we're not burning out our HR talent folks, who are doing great work.
I'm so curious because you by now must have dropped in on so many different organizations.
Yeah.
When someone goes out, you get to poke under the hood and see what's
Hmm.
working, what's not working. Like, what are some of the patterns you see about, oh man, this is how you run things, or this is the systems and procedures you don't have? What are some of the
Yeah.
patterns you see because you've now been in so many different places?
Yeah, I think there's a couple big patterns. I think one of them is we are recreating the wheel too often, right? We're still trying to say, oh, well, we'll make this thing for our organization, when at this point, most things are out there and you can kind of adopt and tweak them to work for you. I think we're still building leadership development programs, and we're still building principal trainings. And at this point, there's just so many places and resources where that's been done, and it's been done well. So I see a lot of that. I also see, and I think this is sometimes unique to like the charter space, and sometimes education, but myself included, I was hired up into a role without a whole lot of training. I mean, heck, I was a teacher at 22 with 5 weeks of training, right? Like,
Yeah, sounds familiar.
why was I the adult in the classroom? And then I was hired as a recruiter with no training, and then I was hired to manage people with no training. And that kind of tends to be our model, like, let's just hire really smart people who will figure it out, and they do. But oftentimes that means like there's a little bit of a learning curve, and so I love to be able to provide like resources and support for folks who are find themselves in that role where it's like, I know I can do this, but this is a big jump or a big stretch opportunity. And I see a lot of that where it's just really great people who maybe are promoted up too soon or who are, in a role that's just a little bit bigger than what they might have been ready for.
So at this point, do you have like a greatest hits package? Like you always get to play the here's how to do lock it in conversations and improve retention, or here's how to source better. Like what are the things you find that you give the most often to places that you go?
Yeah. I think definitely retention and stay conversations and tracking retention dashboards, like that's a huge thing in education. Most folks, I think, have recruitment and selection figured out, but sometimes I'll step in and kind of tweak that as well, particularly in some smaller networks. I think a lot of networks grow where it's like there's just a couple schools, so the principal's going to do everything. And then at some point, they have to make that transition to where there's like central support. And that can be difficult because now you're trying to merge multiple selection processes or preferences. So sometimes I'll step into that, but a lot of times the recruitment and like applicant tracking is pretty solid and in place. I've also seen a lot of compensation work in the past several years with just, pay transparency being a big thing and pay equity. A lot of folks, and obviously we know like teachers aren't paid enough and educators aren't paid enough. And so there's a lot of creativity happening, I think, in the compensation space in education. And so I've had a chance to play some fun roles in supporting that work as well.
One thing I was curious about too, I was telling you before we started recording, I really liked your LinkedIn presence and like LinkedIn approach. It's a nice mix of kind of long form good advice mixed with some good reminders to be empathic if you're a manager or this or that. Like, how are you sort of seeing LinkedIn play into growing new business for yourself, but also just kind of what presence you want to have out in the social media world?
Yeah. I think LinkedIn's a good spot to just like showcase expertise, right? And provide, a thought leadership. And so there's definitely some like big names that do that, right? I don't like have a huge following, but most of my following are folks who are in schools. And I definitely get folks who reach out and they're like, thank you. This is exactly like the list I needed right now. Or I hadn't thought about that. Or crap, I didn't even know that law was passed, or here's the deadline coming up. And so I kind of just see myself as like for that kind of audience of education leaders, HR leaders, and nonprofit, like if you come to my LinkedIn, you're pretty much always going to be seeing little list of practical tips and things to be thinking about every week. And I just it's also a good place to kind of flesh out my own thinking, right? And then that oftentimes will come into my actual practice and business and materials that I create for clients as well.
Then last thing, are folks asking you about how AI should or shouldn't shape HR talent processes? What kind of conversations are you having about that?
Yeah, I've had a lot of those with other independent consultants. I don't know that I've had as much conversation with folks in the education space. I think it's going to be a really interesting spot right now. And I was talking to someone and I said, you should really like, he was looking for kind of career change, but staying in HR. I was like, AI and HR is going to be like a pretty big thing. I think at some point, like you should go figure out what that might mean or what that might look like. I think we're starting to see it more and more probably in the recruitment space in some of like automations and some of the outreach and then, ATS, applicant tracking systems and, screenings and those sorts of things. I'll be really curious to see. It's not going to be able to replace, in my opinion, an HR manager, right? Like somebody who's actually going to coach a leader through a really tricky conversation or how to terminate someone or how to like communicate to their staff. I don't know that AI is like going to be able to replace that role, but it is sometimes a good starting spot for like, can you give me talking points for terminating an employee about, who did XYZ? Or can you give me some communications for an email about a tough change management? Like it is starting to be used a lot in that way. And I think that that's actually a really helpful way that can like supplement the work of the HR and talent folks.
Yeah. So how can folks find you on LinkedIn? How can folks find you to hire you and give you money to do cool stuff? What's
Yeah,
the best way to do that?
yeah. LinkedIn, Sarah Brock, and it's actually /Sarah Brock. I was the first one to
Oh,
get that, so easy to find. And then you can find me on my website, Sarah with an H, BBEE talent.com. And that's where all of you can contact me there and you can see more about kind of the services that I offer.
love it. We'll put all that stuff in the info of the
Awesome.
episode. Thanks for coming on, Sarah. Thanks to everyone for
Yeah.
listening. All the places you get your podcast, of course, you can find all past episodes. There's so many now. There's four of 4 million any day now. Thanks for listening. And until next time, we'll catch you soon.